We're back with Marc Silber as he goes over 5 more hacks to help you advance your photography.
One of my favorite points, I brought it up a lot, our guests have brought it up, and that is know the masters. Get to know the masters. Look at these guys' work. Not to copy. Don't get hung up in the idea that we're going to copy anybody, because you can't. You couldn't copy him if you tried. I couldn't. But it gives you an idea. Next time you go to take a portrait of somebody, don't just think of that in terms of I'm shooting them straight on, or I'm going to move them over here, the rule of thirds or whatever. Put them anywhere you want in the frame, and put whatever else you want in the frame too, along with it, because you're telling that story about them. So we're up to number 3. You'll hear this one every time I go on my broadcast. Get out and capture your own images of life. Somebody actually left I love the comment about, those were well-chosen words, you guys. I chose this little phrase to end with, I don't know, over a decade ago. And I kind of morphed it, from the news guy that I think I told you about if you were on my news show. If you don't like the news, go out and make some of your own. I thought, you don't like the way the world is? You don't like how it looks? Well, make some images of your own. And sometimes, it's like we can forget. We've got to get out every day and capture our own images of life, our own images. Again, you can stockpile this creativity in your head. You can look at YouTube videos. You can read books. You can learn stuff from, the masters. You can do testing with your camera. But at the end of the day, listen, Michael Jordan, the world's most amazing, probably top basketball player, arguably in the top 5, I'd say probably number 1. What was he all about? He wanted to play basketball and win. So all the practicing, all the stuff that he had to do off the court that he wasn't really happy with, all this, all that, it was all because he wanted to play basketball and he wanted to win. So take that to heart. Capture your own images of life daily. Okay, we're up to number 2. I wrote about this in my book, Advancing Your Photography. You may have glossed over this and said, yeah, Mark, that's pretty cool. Listen, you guys, I'm going to brag here. This little illustration was distilled out of over 1,000 hours of interviews with all sorts of different photographers, some living and some not. I didn't interview Ansel myself, but I had the privilege of interviewing his son and using unreleased footage of Ansel Adams. Same thing with Edward Weston. I was able to follow Annie Leibovitz around and talk with her, Chase Jarvis, you name it, all these people. And out of this, I realized there was something missing. There was a cycle that goes on with photography. And where was this written? Who had put it into any kind of form? Nobody. So I thought, okay, I'm going to figure this thing out. It took me a couple of years, actually, maybe about 5 years. And I first thought there were only 4 parts to it. But then as I kind of drew this thing out, I realized, wait a minute, there are 5 parts. First is visualization. I'm not going to beat this to death, but you have to visualize. And this goes back to my number 1 point of getting a plan. That's your vision. It actually, it resonates with every one of these things I said. Okay, once you visualize, that actually carries through the entire process. Then you've got to know your equipment. And we've already covered that. You got to know what your camera sees. Then you capture. What's capturing? Capturing is light and composition. Really, that's all there is to it. Then you process your image. Okay, so I process a lot of images as black and whites. And if you saw our episode with Doton Sagai, we both use Silver Effects Pro from DxO. I think it's absolutely the best processing for black and white images. The point is, I might have visualized this as a black and white, but I need to then process it so it really pops. Then you got to share it. You got to get your work out to the world. If you don't do that, it would be kind of like you're making a meal, but nobody gets to eat it. And remember, sharing doesn't just mean social media, it means putting it on your wall. It means putting it into books. It means putting it on, holiday cards. Get your work out there. Share your work. That's the cycle of photography. Know it and use it. We're up to number 1. What do you guys think it is? Is it some piece of equipment? How many equipment hacks have I given you here? 1. Is it some new camera? Is it some like cool trick? The number 1 hack is one word. What do you think it is? One word. Communication. I'm going to let that resonate. I'm going to talk about this more than all the other ones. Communication. It is defined in the Oxford Dictionary as the successful conveying or sharing of ideas and feelings. Photography is a communication tool. Photo, again, means light. Graphy is writing. We're writing with light. Now, if we were writing with a pen, you'd absolutely know you're communicating to somebody. You write them a note. I love you. That's a communication. I feel bad today. That's a communication. I'm really blown away by what I'm seeing. That's a communication. This is a written form of communication. When we're communicating as photographers, we're trying to, the great photographer Alfred Stieglitz, who you may not know who he is, but he was the one that really probably more than anyone, he was a mentor to Ansel Adams, first of all, but he was responsible for bringing photography from purely a documentary pictorial form, like you could do an engraving, and it was an exact replica of what was out there. He was the one that really introduced photography as an art form, and we really can thank him because there was a long time, you guys, where photography was not considered an art form, and it wasn't necessarily used as an art form. It was a recording device. Here are the trees. Here's a train. Here's a woman. It was very plain. It was just recording what was out there, and he was responsible for bringing it into an art form that we appreciate today. And he said, what you're trying to convey in your photograph is an equivalent, he used this word equivalent, of what you saw and what you felt. Why does he use equivalent? Because it's not an exact reproduction of obviously what you saw and felt. You're back here somewhere, and you're looking at this huge scene, and your camera is a rectangle or a square, and you're taking out of that whole scene, you're taking one really fairly small part, of that, and it's equivalent. So again, you might process it as a black and white. You didn't see it as a black and white, but you saw something, and you're communicating that feeling. Okay, now there's so many layers to communication. I really should do a whole show on this. You've got to, be communicating with your environment. And this question comes up, with people on street photography. Do you go up to people and tell them or ask them if you can take their photograph or not? Is there some rule to this? Or do you do what Henri Cartier-Bresson did, where he just kind of was so stealthy, he just captured the photograph before anybody knew he was there? But if you look at it, many of his photographs, that's not even possible. He had to make his presence known. And I think the answer is you're only going to know that if you're in communication with your environment. And that's really important. Do I need to introduce myself? Sometimes you definitely do. Deanne Fitzmaurice mentioned, this photograph she took in Cuba where there were these guys that were kind of looking at her a little bit like, who is this chick, And she just made eye contact with him, and communicated that she's taking a photograph, and they chilled. So it could be as simple as that. That's a form of communication. Hey, I'm okay if I take your photograph. You could do it without saying a word, right? But the point is, you are in communication with your environment. A camera is a means of communication. But you have so many other means of communicating besides that. Your facial expression. Ed Kashi talked about, become involved with your subject. Don't just rush in, grab a photo and rush out. You're there with people. And that's really the key point here of communication. Who are we photographing and who are we showing our photographs to? People, other people, even if it's one other person. There's a person at the other end of this viewing it, and that's who you're conveying how you felt. So always remember that. And communication with your camera, we talked about that. Communication with the art form itself. Like, again, how could you make this a creative photograph rather than just a reproduction? You got to communicate with your camera. You got to know what your camera sees. That's a form of communication. With the people in your environment. With, actually it goes across the boards on the 5 stages of photography. Your visualization is a communication. Your own mind, seeing what's out there, knowing your equipment, capturing. You got to look at the light. You got to look at the composition, processing. What am I trying to communicate here? Do I want dark clouds in this, or do I want it to be really bright? You can do that with your processing. You change those things. And then sharing. Well, you know what the derivation of the word communication is? Very interesting. It comes from the Latin shared. It also goes back to communicare, which means common. You're putting something out there that other people, you can share with others that they have in common, and it sparks something. There is a message there.
We hope that you enjoyed that video. If you did, please give it a like and leave a comment. We love to hear from you. If you want to see more videos like this, be sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so that you can know when all of our future videos come out. And finally, be sure to get out there and capture your own images of life.